利嘅鋪頭，亦都係消費者委員會喺1986年咧第一間要公佈嘅鋪頭。呢間鋪頭咧個名咧就叫做佳發電業行。佢嘅地址就喺九龍馬頭圍道紅磡廣場嘅地下 G39號嘅。呢間鋪頭咧就係、以前一路咧，我哋都收到佢嘅關於佢嘅投訴㗎。咁耐咧，我哋係收到佢有40宗投訴咁多。
Selena Chow elaborates on the effectiveness of such public accusations.
It's been very, very effective. In two ways. We have seen, in fact, that some of these shops have gone out of business, in fact, as a result of our making known their names. Others have changed their names so as to avoid, the bad effects of the announcements.
Earlier you mentioned that there are some dealers that can change their names and have done so. How effective is this publicizing of the names?
Actually, it is not as easy for the dealer in question as it sounds. Although a lot of people have found that they intended to change their name on the day that their old name was announced, up to this day they haven't opened for business. Now, of course, there is the question of suppliers. I mean, when they change a name, whether the suppliers would continue to supply is one matter. Whether customers would go to the new shop, which might be selling the same stuff as the old shop in the same address, that is another question. So it is not really as simple as it sounds.
About 2 weeks ago, there was a closing down sale at what was once Kai Fat. On the day of the press conference, its name was changed, and it closed for almost 2 weeks. Now it's wound up. There are still 15 cases that haven't been settled and never will. Can anything be done to protect consumers?
As far as possible, bearing in mind that we don't necessarily think that we would resort to legislation, we would try and do it in a persuasive manner. As far as possible. It's only when we can't do it with persuasion then we resort to legislation.
Does Selena Chow think Hong Kong might benefit from a free trade ordinance, which isn't in practice now?
Controlling certain trade practices. Now, one has to be very careful because when we talk about that, we have to always bear in mind that every one of us in Hong Kong wants to safeguard our free trade practice and free trade philosophy. So we don't want to control trade unnecessarily because there might just be other sort of implications or side effects as a result of legislation passed to control trade.
So it looks as if the responsibility of getting a fair deal lies with you. As long as you're always on the hunt for a bargain, there'll always be somebody out there ready to give you one, or so you think.
There is a sucker born every minute. Each time that second hand sweeps to the top like dandelions, up they pop, their ears so big, their eyes so wide and low. I feed them bona fide baloney with no truth in it. Why, you can bet I'll find some room to buy my corn, 'cause there's a sure shooting sucker born a minute, and I'm referring to the minute you was born.
Next, on Focus, we'll turn to another type of service, changing looks, and see how that can be abused. Mrs. Wong is applying medicine instead of makeup. She wanted to look younger and thought the secret to youth lay in her eyes. She went to a beauty parlor for help in improving her looks. The treatment went wrong. Every morning when she looks at herself in the mirror, she regrets that decision.
自卑心就好重咯，點解會俾搞成咁樣咧？咁樣係咪自己好靚嗰陣時諗住話後生得15歲，點知道而家仲老咗，本身老咗兼及咧就嗰個心靈上仲更加老添。有陣時行出街啊，成啲人眼望望啊，你一變咗咧嗰個情緒嗰方面咧就好低落咯。 甚至咧個老俾啲老公啊仔啊都笑咯，變咗精神上有一種壓力咯。
Mrs. Wong's story started about 3 months ago. She told Focus that after reading some beauty parlor advertisements in magazines, she decided to remove her eye bags. She went to a beauty parlor in Mong Kok. She said the staff there persuaded her to do something about her eyelids too. Later, she was brought to a clinic for treatment. Mrs. Wong said an operation was carried out, but the results were bad. So she asked the beauty parlor for her money back. It had cost her about $9,000.
The beauty parlor refused to return Mrs. Wong's fee until we took up the case. Focus asked the person in charge of the beauty parlor for an interview, but she declined. But on the telephone, she told us that it was Mrs. Wong who asked for an upper eyelid treatment, and all they did was refer her to a doctor. And since then, they claim they didn't know what happened next. The clinic Mrs. Wong went to is an exempted clinic. Exempted clinics are run by medical practitioners. They're usually trained as doctors in non-Commonwealth countries. In 1964, the Medical and Health Department set up a panel of specialists to interview those doctors then present in Hong Kong. About 200 passed the interview, and since then they can now practice in Hong Kong, but only as medical practitioners and not as doctors. This is a code of practice designed specifically for those medical practitioners. One of the rules deals with misconduct.
And this includes disregard of personal responsibilities to patients, such as gross neglect in diagnosis or treatment, including the performance of any kind of operation and treatment for which your clinic is not properly equipped. If any medical practitioner violates such rules, he may be disqualified.
What exactly are the operations that these medical practitioners can't perform? To find out, Focus asked the Medical and Health Department for an interview.